What up, world? It's Fess of Reverb, and I'm back in the studio making house tracks and just thinking about how house is really back in the conversation of modern music. So now that everybody's talking about house in terms of production and getting these classic house sounds, I started thinking about it from a synth perspective and wondering how could I get these classic house bass lines using more affordable synths. Obviously, I could use this Model D behind me or some of the other legacy synths that we have here hiding in the corners at Reverb, but I actually wanted to come at it from a more budget perspective. So achieving a classic house bass can be, we could talk about a lot of different areas, but I actually want to break it down into a few subgenres of house that resonate with me the most and what I like to produce the most. And I'm talking acid house, deep house, and tech house. So if you're in the house, you're probably well aware that acid house got its start right here in Chicago in the mid 80s by DJ Pierre and his group Future. DJ Pierre was using the TB-303 and had a step sequence going and really started messing with the accent and the envelope to get that sort of squelch. The cool thing is now, flash forward 30 something years later, we have a lot of things that can give you that same acid bass. You really only need a synth that has a step sequencer, and within that step sequencer, the ability to add accents and slides. And then your synth also needs to have an envelope that can envelope the filter. So luckily, the Mother 32 has all of that. So the other element of acid bass is using a square or pulse wave and having a filter that can do high resonance, even self-resonate in some cases. So the Mother 32 does all that. In its default mode, it's going to accent every step, but I actually have that off right now. But let's hear it. I can obviously sit here and ride the filter knobs and sort of get that squelch going, but there's still no accent on the actual envelope for the filter. So I need to use the patch bay to actually get some variable accents going, and that's really going to get us in that acid moving territory where everything is sounding real drippy and squelchy. So let me just patch this out. I have it in a mode to where the accents are coming out of the VC mix output. So I could just easily go out of that and let's mode this output. Let's go into the mode input. And I'm gonna send one output to the VCA CV and send another output to the VCF cutoff. Now I could use this VC mix knob to sort of bring in those accented steps. So instead of having to turn both of these knobs, I could just turn this one knob. Or I could take it a step further and use control voltage to actually modulate this. So I could just use the LFO here. Let's do the LFO triangle output, go into the VC mix control, which is this knob that I just got through turning, and use voltage control. To do that myself, or use voltage control to actually bring in those accents. Let's throw a little beat on that. Now that I'm using this VC mix, I don't have a way to really attenuate this LFO. So it's kind of coming in like full blast. But if you just take it out and don't use that, you can also just rhythmically ride the knob with whatever drum beat you got going. So now another subgenre of house that really resonates with me, something that I like to attempt to make good records in, is deep house. Deep house also has its origins in Chicago, started by Larry Heard with his hits like Can You Feel It and Mystery of Love. And Larry Heard, like many house producers at the time, he was using Roland gear. The debate kind of goes back and forth to be like whether he was using the Juno on this record or the Jupiter 6 on this record. But what remains to be true is that he had a TR-707 and was using one or both of those synths in all of his early hits. And the cool thing about the MC707 is that all of those sounds are packed in here, albeit in digital analog modeling patches, but you still have access to all of those sounds that gave birth to this deep house genre and other subgenres of house. So with that being said, going back to the origins of deep house, Larry Heard using his Juno 106, using the post wave to actually get that in your face bass. So the Juno 106 had a famous chorus on it, as did the Jupiter. And if you want to get that sound, you definitely need to add some chorus to your bass. So here's a Juno square post wave. Here's it dry. And if I add some chorus and just lengthen the decay a little bit. If I just play the sequence I got going here. Let's go dry again. Close the filter a little bit. And add that chorus. Bring in the beat. That's a nice deep house bass to me. I wouldn't even really touch this bass. I would actually just go and start adding more elements of deep house, more instrumentation, some pads, obviously some vocals as well. But this bass sound used on countless amounts of early deep house records. But also as deep house started to evolve, so did the tools. And lots of deep house producers were using the Yamaha DX7, which is, the quintessential FM synth that came out in the mid 80s. And I don't have a DX7, but I do have the Korg Op6 here, which is a very capable FM synth. With FM synths, it's all designated by the number of operators. What is an operator? It's just a sine wave. You could designate by way of switching up algorithms which operator are modulating the other operators. And you're doing all this with sine waves for the most part. The cool thing about the Op6 is you could switch up the waves. You could have a square wave modulating a sine wave modulating a square or noise or whatever. But then it also color codes which operators are what we call the carrier, as in carrying the audio signal, and which operators are the modulator. And of course, you have lots of algorithms you could choose from. The algorithms are changing up the routing of having certain operators modulate certain carriers and vice versa. So if we just start with one operator here, I'm using operator 1. First of all, you're making bass, so just tune your ratio down to a bass that you like. I think I want to stick right here. And you could just use another operator. You only need 2 in this case. So I'm gonna use operator 2. And let me actually bring up the level. Now you're actually hearing operator 2 already modulating. You wanna also turn down the ratio for your modulator. And then you also want to set a shorter decay on your modulator to give it that actual punch. So here is just the first operator, which is just a sine wave. And as I bring up the modulator, the second operator here, you hear this sine wave just get a little bit more punchy. The more you open up your decay on your modulator, the less punchy it gets. So it's not like the exact M1 organ bass that has now become super, super popular. But the Op6 gets you in the ballpark, and obviously you can just keep stacking on this by using more modulators, using a different carrier to sort of give you a more sub-bass feel. But this is actually cool, and this is a quintessential deep house bass sound that was used a lot, especially in the early 90s. This is a FM bass patch that you can make on pretty much any FM synth that's out there, even the FM synths that you get with a lot of software, but also if you're using a Korg Voca FM, you could achieve this patch very easily by just using 2 FM operators. Now, tech house is most obviously the combination of techno and house music, mainly techno sort of synths and modulated synth sounds mainly, mixed with house type rhythms. And that can be pretty subjective. You might have your own opinions of tech house, but for me, it's really the marriage of really Detroit style techno and Chicago style house. So you could basically do tech house bass in sort of whatever way you want to do it. But I like to do it with really using a square wave and a sawtooth wave, having the sawtooth act as my sub with the square wave. And for beats, I mean, use whatever you're making to make your house beats. Right now, I'm actually going to use the MPC-1. Out of the box, just like the MC707, you have everything you need to make all sorts of different house with this new MPC-1, especially if you count all of their new synth plugins that they have in here. But in keeping things related to synths, I actually am using an external synth here. I'm going to use my Korg Monologue. And this is a monophonic analog synth that gives you 2 VCOs and gives you more than enough to make fat bass lines, particularly fat tech house bass lines. Just like some of the other classic house sounds we were going through, like with acid bass or in deep house bass to some degree, usually the sequencer that you have is really gonna be the difference maker in achieving that sound. And with tech house, you definitely wanna have lots of glide and even some legato, or at the very least portamento in between your notes, and you don't want your bass lines to be super musical with tech house, maybe like 2 or 3 notes in general. This monologue, in addition to being a dope analog monophonic synth, it also has a great sequencer on it that can do slide and motion and just keep things very simple when you're trying to make, a tech house bass line. So let's actually start by shaping the bass sound that we want to use. We're going to use a square wave and a sawtooth wave here. I mean, right out of the box, even just using the square wave with this monologue, that, is definitely bass territory, house bass for sure, but things get a lot more fat when you throw in like a sawtooth wave to act as like your sub under that square wave. Let's open up the filter more. So now we got this growl going that if I kept this filter open, that's a whole nother bass style all within itself. But just rolling that filter off a little bit, is. So for me, tech house really evolves around the bass line really being sort of offbeat to whatever drums you got going on. And also switching off from longer notes to shorter notes, but without being too like musical, without going all the way up and down the scale. Usually like 2 or 3 note changes and you're good for a tech house bass line. So check out this little sequence I got going with these drums. I actually kind of like that. It's a little offbeat, but I'm actually going to apply a little bit of modulation, doing a triangle wave, going to the cutoff. It's like a faux side chain. But as you see, these tech house bass lines is really all about simple notes, but just adding some movement in between notes. So you could do that with modulation. You could do that with adding slides or glides or portamento in between your notes. It's really open-ended, but more so than anything, with tech house bass, you kind of want that warm bass that sort of rocks the sub a little bit and it's not too aggressive. All right, y'all, well, that was some classic house bass patches using various different synths and a few different methods. I've been making house for quite some time now, but I'm nowhere near the house sound design expert. So I would actually love to hear what y'all are doing to make some of these classic house sounds. What type of synths you're using? What are some secret weapons out there? Well, that's all I got for y'all today. I'm Fess Grandiose, signing off of Reverb. As always, stay safe and keep creating. Peace.